February 14th, 2024, and Captain Jake Sullivan is flying over Manhattan when both engines fail, leaving him with only minutes to find a landing site in the most densely populated city in America. But as he spots the lights of Times Square below, he realizes that fate has brought him to the exact place where his heart was broken 5 years ago, and where the woman he never stopped loving is about to get married to someone else. What happened next will prove that sometimes the most desperate moments create the most beautiful second chances, and that love really can conquer impossible odds when two hearts refuse to give up on each other. Stay until the end, because this story will show you that some love stories are worth landing in the middle of Broadway to save. Captain Jake Sullivan had been avoiding flights over Manhattan for 5 years, ever since the night his engagement to Broadway actress Emma Rodriguez ended in heartbreak. On the very streets he was now flying over, as his twin-engine Cessna carried 8 passengers, from Boston to Washington, D.C., on what should have been a routine Valentine's Day evening flight. Jake's relationship with Emma had been the kind of love story that seemed destined for fairy tale endings. When they met at a charity gala in 2018, where she was performing selections from her hit Broadway musical, while he was there representing his airline's community outreach program, creating an instant connection between the grounded pilot and the soaring performer. Their 3-year relationship had been passionate and deep, despite the challenges of his unpredictable flight schedules and her demanding Broadway performance calendar. But they had made it work through countless late-night calls, video chats between shows, and stolen weekends when both their careers allowed them to be together. The proposal had happened on the stage of the Majestic Theater after one of Emma's performances, with Jake surprising her in front of the entire cast and crew as he got down on one knee and asked her to marry him with a ring he had been carrying for months, waiting for the perfect moment. But their engagement had lasted only 8 months before the pressures of their careers and a series of misunderstandings about priorities and commitment led to increasingly frequent arguments that culminated in Emma returning his ring during a devastating confrontation outside the theater where they had gotten engaged. Jake's flight over Manhattan that February evening was supposed to be just another routine charter, carrying business passengers and a few tourists, but the route took him directly over the Broadway district, where every lit marquee and crowded street reminded him of what he had lost 5 years earlier. Among his passengers that night was Dr. Sarah Chen, a heart surgeon returning from a medical conference, businessman Michael Torres celebrating his company's expansion, elderly couple Robert and Mary Williams on their 50th anniversary trip, and young couple David and Lisa Park, who were engaged and planning their summer wedding. The first sign of engine trouble appeared at 7:47 p.m., as Jake noticed unusual readings on his instruments, while flying at 8,000 feet over the Hudson River approaching Manhattan airspace for his planned route south toward Washington, D.C., but initially the problem seemed minor and manageable. Emma Rodriguez had rebuilt her life after their breakup, becoming one of Broadway's most sought-after leading ladies, with starring roles in 3 major productions and a Tony nomination that had established her as a rising star in the theater world. But she had never quite managed to forget Jake or the way he had made her feel truly alive. On this particular February 14th, Emma was preparing for what she thought would be the second most important day of her life, as she was scheduled to marry investment banker Richard Hartwell the following morning, in a lavish ceremony at the Plaza Hotel that would unite 2 of New York's most prominent families. Richard was everything that Jake was not: stable, wealthy, predictable, and completely devoted to Emma's career success. But their relationship lacked the passionate connection and deep understanding that she had shared with Jake, even though she had convinced herself that mature love was supposed to be more practical than passionate. Jake's engine problems escalated rapidly as both engines began showing signs of catastrophic failure while he was flying directly over Times Square at 8:15 p.m., leaving him with perhaps 3 minutes to find a landing site in the most densely populated area of the most densely populated city in America. The passenger cabin remained calm, as Jake had not yet announced the severity of their situation. But Dr. Chen noticed the unusual aircraft behavior and began quietly preparing for a potential emergency, while the other passengers continued their conversations, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Jake's 20 years of flying experience, including military training and numerous emergency situations, had never prepared him for the prospect of having to land an aircraft in Manhattan, with no airports within gliding distance and millions of people below who could be endangered by any mistake. As he assessed his options, Jake realized that Times Square itself might represent his only chance for survival, as the wide intersection of Broadway and 7th Avenue provided the longest stretch of relatively clear pavement available anywhere in the immediate area. Though it was crowded with thousands of pedestrians and vehicles, the irony was not lost on Jake that his potential crash site was the exact location where his relationship with Emma had flourished during their early dating days, when they would meet after her shows to walk through the bright lights and energy of the theater district, sharing dreams and plans for their future together. Emma was at that very moment having dinner with her wedding party at Sardi's restaurant, just 2 blocks from Times Square, discussing final preparations for the next day's ceremony, while trying to ignore the nagging feeling that she was making the biggest mistake of her life by marrying a man she liked but didn't truly love. The emergency landing attempt would require Jake to clear Times Square of pedestrians and vehicles, while also executing the most technically challenging landing of his career on a surface never designed for aircraft operations, surrounded by buildings that could clip his wings if his approach wasn't perfect. At 8:18 p.m., Jake made the decision that would either save 8 lives or end them, as he declared a Mayday emergency and requested immediate assistance in clearing Times Square for an unprecedented emergency landing that would either be remembered as a miracle of aviation or a tragedy in the heart of New York City. The NYPD and emergency services began the impossible task of evacuating Times Square, while Jake fought to keep his powerless aircraft in the air long enough to reach the improvised landing strip that represented their only hope for survival. In a situation that seemed designed by fate to test both his flying skills and his heart, the emergency evacuation of Times Square on Valentine's Day evening created chaos and confusion, as thousands of tourists and New Yorkers found themselves suddenly being rushed away from the crossroads of the world by police officers shouting about an incoming aircraft emergency, while Jake fought to maintain control of his failing plane above the glittering canyon of Broadway. Emma heard the sirens and commotion from Sardi's restaurant and stepped outside with her wedding party to see what was happening just as Jake's aircraft appeared above the buildings lining Times Square, beginning its final approach toward the intersection that had once been the backdrop for their happiest memories together. The technical challenges of landing a twin-engine aircraft on Broadway required Jake to thread the needle between towering electronic billboards, massive buildings, and the normal obstacles of city traffic, while also dealing with wind patterns created by the urban canyon effect that made precise control nearly impossible. NYPD aviation units provided guidance and crowd control, while emergency medical services positioned themselves around the landing area preparing for casualties, though everyone involved understood that the chances of a successful outcome were minimal, given the unprecedented nature of the emergency. Jake's passengers finally understood the gravity of their situation as the aircraft descended toward the bright lights and noise of Times Square, with Dr. Chen taking charge of emergency preparations, while the elderly couple Robert and Mary Williams held hands and whispered prayers for their survival. The engaged couple David and Lisa Park looked at each other with the realization that their planned summer wedding might never happen, while businessman Michael Torres called his family to tell them he loved them, as Jake's voice over the intercom calmly explained that they were attempting an emergency landing. Emma watched in growing amazement and horror as she recognized the aircraft type and realized that the pilot executing this impossible landing had to be Jake. Though she could not understand what twist of fate had brought him to Times Square on the night before her wedding to another man, the final approach required Jake to maintain perfect alignment with Broadway, while avoiding the numerous obstacles that could destroy his aircraft and kill everyone aboard, including light poles, signs, parked vehicles, and the occasional pedestrian who had not yet been cleared from the area. At 8:21 p.m., Jake brought his aircraft down on Broadway between 42nd and 43rd Streets in what witnesses would later describe as the most technically perfect emergency landing they had ever seen, as the aircraft touched down smoothly and rolled to a stop just yards from the TKTS red steps, where Jake and Emma had shared their first kiss. The immediate aftermath saw emergency responders rushing to the aircraft, while crowds of onlookers pressed against police barriers to witness the unprecedented scene of a commercial aircraft sitting in the middle of Times Square, surrounded by the bright lights and billboards that made the location instantly recognizable around the world. Emma pushed through the crowd of wedding party members and restaurant patrons who had gathered to watch the emergency landing, but she stopped in shock when she saw Jake climbing out of the aircraft and realized that fate had literally brought the man she had never stopped loving back into her life on the night before her wedding. Jake's first priority was ensuring the safety of his passengers, as emergency medical teams checked everyone for injuries while also coordinating with the NYPD to secure the area and begin planning for the complex process of removing the aircraft from one of the world's busiest intersections. Dr. Chen emerged from the aircraft shaken but uninjured and immediately offered her services to help with any medical emergencies, while praising Jake's exceptional flying skills and calm leadership during the crisis that had brought them all safely to the ground against impossible odds. The emotional reunion between Jake and Emma occurred in the middle of the crowd and chaos as she approached the aircraft, and their eyes met for the first time in 5 years, creating a moment of recognition and connection that seemed to stop time. Despite the sirens and commotion surrounding them, their first words were simple, with Emma asking if he was hurt and Jake responding that he was fine. Before the weight of their unexpected reunion and the circumstances that had brought it about began to sink in for both of them as they stood in the middle of Times Square, the media response was immediate and overwhelming as news helicopters circled overhead, while reporters and photographers captured images of the aircraft in Times Square, along with the dramatic reunion between the pilot and his former fiancée, who had been brought together by what seemed like divine intervention. Richard Hartwell arrived on the scene within minutes of being notified about Emma's involvement in the emergency, and was shocked to learn that the pilot who had just executed the most talked-about landing in aviation history was the same man Emma had been engaged to before their relationship began. The passenger evacuation proceeded smoothly, with all 8 people aboard the aircraft walking away from the landing without serious injuries, though several were treated for minor cuts and bruises sustained during the emergency, while Jake remained focused on coordinating with authorities despite his emotional turmoil. Emma's wedding party watched in amazement as the bride-to-be stood talking with her former fiancé in the middle of Broadway, surrounded by emergency vehicles and thousands of onlookers, while her current fiancé struggled to understand how this impossible coincidence had occurred on the night before their wedding. The aircraft would remain in Times Square for several hours, as engineers determined how to safely remove it without damaging the plane or disrupting the city, while also managing the crowds of tourists who wanted to see and photograph the unprecedented sight of a commercial aircraft parked on Broadway. Jake and Emma found themselves with an opportunity to talk privately for the first time in 5 years, as the initial emergency response concluded and they were given space to process what had happened, while also dealing with the unresolved feelings and emotions that their unexpected reunion had awakened. The conversation that followed would change both their lives, as they stood in the place where their love story had begun years earlier, now given an impossible second chance by circumstances that seemed too extraordinary to be mere coincidence, rather than fate intervening in their lives. The hours following Jake's miraculous landing in Times Square became a whirlwind of media attention, official investigations and personal revelations, as Emma found herself torn between the wedding she had planned for the next day and the undeniable feelings that seeing Jake again had awakened in her heart. Richard Hartwell handled the situation with remarkable grace and understanding, as he realized that Emma's reaction to seeing Jake again revealed feelings that she had never truly resolved, leading to a difficult but honest conversation about whether their wedding should proceed as planned. Jake spent the early morning hours being debriefed by FAA investigators and aviation officials, while also giving interviews to news organizations that were covering what was already being called the most romantic emergency landing in aviation history, though he remained focused on Emma and their unexpected reunion. Emma made the painful decision to postpone her wedding after realizing that seeing Jake again had reminded her of what true love felt like, and that marrying Richard, while her heart belonged to someone else, would be unfair to everyone involved, including herself. The conversation between Emma and Jake that took place at sunrise on February 15th, in the quiet aftermath of the Times Square emergency, lasted for 6 hours, as they shared what had happened in their lives during the 5 years they had been apart. While also confronting the misunderstandings that had ended their engagement, Jake revealed that he had never married or even seriously dated anyone else, because no relationship had ever compared to what he had shared with Emma. While she admitted that her relationship with Richard had been more about security and social expectations than passionate love, the media circus surrounding their reunion created additional pressure, as photographers and reporters followed their every move while social media exploded, with speculation about whether the couple would get back together. After such a dramatic and romantic reunion, Emma's Broadway colleagues and friends were divided in their advice, as some encouraged her to follow her heart while others warned that the intensity of the emergency landing might be creating false feelings that wouldn't last once the adrenaline and excitement wore off. Richard surprised everyone, including Emma, by releasing a statement wishing her happiness and acknowledging that their relationship had lacked the kind of deep connection that was necessary for a successful marriage, while also expressing his respect for Jake's heroic actions. The passengers from Jake's flight became unlikely matchmakers as they shared their perspective on witnessing the reunion between Jake and Emma, while also describing how Jake's calm professionalism during the emergency had demonstrated the kind of character that made him worthy of a second chance. Dr. Chen, who had observed the entire situation from a medical professional's perspective, offered her opinion that the connection between Jake and Emma was clearly genuine, and that life-threatening situations often reveal what truly matters most to people. Jake's airline initially suspended him pending investigation of the unauthorized Times Square landing, but public support and expert analysis of his split-second decision-making led to him being reinstated with commendations for exceptional airmanship under impossible circumstances. Emma took a brief leave from her Broadway show to spend time with Jake and work through their relationship issues with the help of a counselor who specialized in helping couples overcome past trauma and rebuild trust after significant separations. The investigation into the aircraft emergency revealed that a rare mechanical failure had caused both engines to fail simultaneously, while also praising Jake's decision to attempt the Times Square landing as the only viable option that could have saved all 8 lives aboard the aircraft. 3 months after the emergency landing, Jake proposed to Emma again, this time during a private moment on the same Broadway intersection where his aircraft had landed, using the same ring she had returned to him 5 years earlier. But with a deeper understanding of what their love meant to both of them, Emma said yes without hesitation, having realized during their separation that Jake was the only man who had ever truly understood and supported her dreams, while also challenging her to be the best version of herself both personally and professionally. Their wedding took place 6 months later, in a ceremony that combined elements of Aviation and Broadway, with the reception held at the Majestic Theater, where Jake had first proposed and where their love story had begun during those magical early days of their relationship. The aircraft that had brought them back together was restored and eventually donated to the Smithsonian as an example of exceptional emergency airmanship, while also serving as a symbol of how love can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles when two people are meant to be together. Jake continued flying while also becoming an aviation safety consultant, specializing in emergency procedures and decision-making under pressure, while Emma returned to Broadway with a new appreciation for the importance of balancing career success with personal happiness. The couple established a foundation that provides support for emergency responders and their families, while also funding scholarships for young people pursuing careers in aviation and the performing arts. Combining their two passions into meaningful charitable work, their love story became the inspiration for a Broadway musical that Emma both starred in and helped develop, telling the tale of how sometimes the most desperate moments can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. When love refuses to give up, the passengers from that Valentine's Day flight remained close friends with Jake and Emma, while also serving as reminders that their miraculous reunion had been witnessed by people whose lives had also been changed by the experience of surviving an impossible situation. Today, Jake and Emma Sullivan continue to live in New York, where she performs on Broadway. While he flies for a major airline, their love story serving as proof that sometimes fate intervenes in the most dramatic ways possible to ensure that true love finds a way to survive and thrive. The intersection of Broadway and 42nd Street, where Jake landed his aircraft, features a small plaque commemorating the emergency landing and the love story that emerged from what could have been a tragedy, demonstrating that even in the busiest places on Earth, miracles of love and heroism can still occur. Their annual Valentine's Day tradition involves returning to Times Square to celebrate not just their love for each other, but also the extraordinary circumstances that brought them back together, proving that some love stories are literally worth landing in the middle of Broadway to save. Jake and Emma's incredible love story proves that sometimes the universe conspires to give us exactly what we need, even when we think we've lost it forever. And that true love really can survive years of separation, heartbreak, and seemingly impossible circumstances. When two people are meant to be together, their reunion in the middle of Times Square shows us that the most desperate moments can become the most beautiful beginnings, and that some love stories are worth taking extraordinary risks to save. But I want to hear from you. Do you believe that fate brought Jake to Times Square on the night before Emma's wedding? Or do you think it was just an incredible coincidence that happened to work out perfectly for both of them? Have you ever had a relationship that you thought was over forever, but still found yourself hoping for a second chance even years later? What do you think gives some people the courage to take huge risks for love, while others play it safe and potentially miss out on their soulmate? Would you have postponed your wedding the day before the ceremony? If your true love suddenly reappeared in your life after 5 years of separation, do you think Emma made the right choice to follow her heart, instead of going through with a marriage based more on stability than passion? Share your thoughts about second chances, true love, and the incredible things that can happen when we're brave enough to listen to our hearts, even when logic tells us to be practical. Let me know in the comments if this story inspires you to reach out to someone you've never gotten over, or to take a chance on love even when the odds seem impossible. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories that prove love really can conquer all obstacles and create miracles that seem too extraordinary to be real. And hit that notification bell so you never miss these amazing tales that show us how ordinary moments can become extraordinary when love refuses to give up.